Grade 8 English Language Arts Lesson 2 for the week of May 11th through May 15th. This lesson is presented by yours truly, Miss Alexis Wiley from the Office of Secondary English Language Arts. The theme of this unit is the challenges of living in a divided nation. Our essential question is, how can one individual challenges reflect the struggles of an entire nation? In today's lesson, you will learn to understand the concept of tone, to recognize and identify tone in prose and poetry, to identify how changes in words and phrases can affect tone, and about the concept of word choice and connotations. You will need to take notes for today's lesson, so go grab some paper and a writing tool. You can choose any method you want to take notes, but I tend to like the Cornell note-taking method. I'll give you a minute to set up your materials.
Have you ever heard someone say, "Don't use that tone of voice with me"? What this means is, don't talk to me with that attitude. Suppose Josh tells his mother, "I am going to the movie whether or not I've got homework." We would probably imagine him saying this with a defiant tone. But if he were to say, "My homework's done and I'm going to a movie now," his tone would probably be happy. When a person is speaking, the tone of his or her voice tells us how we should interpret what is being said. For example, the sentence, "She's so ridiculous," can mean several different things depending on tone. In literature, tone is the writer's attitude toward his or her subject. Like a tone of voice in speaking, tone in writing might be sarcastic, lighthearted, admiring, shocked, or humorous, just to name a few. Determining the tone of a work of literature can be difficult. Writers can't use their voices, facial expressions, or body language to express tone. Instead, they use several different elements to create tone. Direct statements, strong words and phrases, and imagery, words and phrases that create a mental picture for the reader, are all clues to an author's attitude toward a subject.
You may want to write the definition of the word tone here. Also consider writing the words or the adjectives that you can use to describe the author's tone, like sarcastic, lighthearted, admiring, shocked, or humorous. Throughout the lesson, you may find additional adjectives to add to your list.
Read the following examples. Each one has a very different tone. Click each word to read more.
Outrage. I am outraged by the amount of garbage people still generate. It is a simple matter to carry a bag with you so you don't have to take yet another plastic one home, just to throw it away. Outrage. This writer used strong words and direct statements to express his attitude towards people who create unnecessary garbage by not reusing plastic bags. Sarcastic. Songster Sam Day made quite a spectacle in his lime green suit, yellow shirt, and classy pair of red boots. With taste like that, who needs a stylist? This gossip columnist has written the opposite of what he or she really means, in order to express a negative attitude towards Sam Day's taste in clothing. Romantic. As Alex sat deep in thought, Jeannie walked past, all beaming sunshine and roses, swaying to an imaginary tune. The sun on her hair and the breeze rustling her skirt were as happy to see her as he was.
Just as a person's tone of voice tells you how to interpret a statement, tone in writing gives the reader clues to the writer's meaning. For example, suppose a story involves two characters arguing. The writer describes them in a cold tone that suggests he or she has little respect for them or their fight. The tone tells us that the character's feud is silly. Then, when the argument ends badly, we know that the writer wants us to think they have gotten just what they deserve. Tone also appears in nonfiction. For example, in the biography of a heroic person such as Harriet Tubman, a writer might use words that show an admiring attitude. The writer could do this by using positive adjectives and imagery when describing her actions. On the other hand, a writer might use negative, uncomplimentary language when describing a boastful, outspoken classmate from the past. In this case, we might say the writer's tone is bitter or scornful.
Let's pause here for a second. Sometimes the question may ask, what is the author's attitude about a subject? This question is asking about the author's tone. So make sure you remember that tone equals attitude.
Read the passage on the right. Click the word that best describes the tone.
And the words here are humorous, persuasive, anxious, and cheerful. Well done if you selected anxious. Words and phrases such as paced and took a deep breath give the passage an anxious tone.
Read the passage on the right. Click the word that best describes the tone.
The words are bitter, respectful, objective, and humorous. If you select humorous, congratulations, that's correct. The writer describes the dog in a comic way, which is reinforced through the use of words such as ridiculous and odd and sarcastic phrases.
Poetry also has tone. When you are trying to identify the tone in a poem, remember you are looking for the attitude of the poem speaker toward his or her subject. For example, Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven, begins, "Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary." What words and phrases jump out at you? What images or feelings does this line create for you? Try to sum up those thoughts into a word or two. Gloomy or dramatic might describe the tone of this line. Read the passage on the right. Click the word that best describes the tone.
The words are enthusiastic, serious, mocking, sorrowful. If you chose the word mocking, you're correct. The writer uses a sarcastic nickname, Mr. Irresistible, and unflattering comparisons to a cartoon and a snake as a way of mocking the character.
Read the passage on the right. Click the word that best describes the tone.
The words are ironic, informational, joyful, dramatic. Correct. Job well done. The writer uses clear and concise language, including measurements, to tell us how to make a vernita. The writer's attitude is neutral. So if you chose the word informational, you are correct.
The tone of a work can change from beginning to end. Click on the images to read two sets of lines from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. A change in tone indicates that the writer or speaker's attitude has shifted. If you are reading something and notice a change in tone, try to examine the text for changes in meaning as well. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. These lines have an anxious tone. The speaker may be frightened. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. This line from later in the poem has an angry or stern tone. The poet uses direct, forceful words. A writer must choose words carefully to be sure that he or she is expressing the intended tone. One way to do this is to pay attention to the connotations, or emotional associations of different words. For example, the words slender and scrawny both mean thin, but slender suggests something thin and graceful, while scrawny suggests thin and awkward. A writer's overall word choice is sometimes called diction. A word with a serious tone may use formal diction, or correct grammar and precise words. A humorous work might use informal diction, or more casual language, including slang.
Here's something that is worthy of a note. Remember, the word connotation deals with how a word makes you feel. I would prefer someone to call me slender over scrawny any day, because if you call me scrawny, I'll think that you were trying to hurt my feelings. Also, formal diction. We tend to use formal diction when we're writing to someone like the likes of your principal or your teacher, a dignitary like a governor or mayor. We use informal diction when we're talking to our friends. It's casual. We can use slang in our writing if we're writing informally.
Each of the words below describes one possible tone for the following sentence. Click on the tones and notice how each one is created by using a word with a slightly different connotation. I am annoyed that more people aren't saving water.
So when I click on angry, they're using the word incensed. I am incensed that more people aren't saving water. When I click on surprise, I am astonished that more people aren't saving water. The levels are going greater. Baffled, I am perplexed that more people aren't saving water. Worried, I am concerned that more people aren't saving water.
The examples below give the same information, but with different kinds of word choice or diction and different tones. Which kind of word choice is used in each example?
If you chose formal for the first image, you are correct. The writer uses precise terms and objective, grammatically correct language to share information. If you chose informal language for the second image, you are correct. The lack of precision of the phrase long enough time and the use of slang in you'll burn like an entire chocolate bar give this sentence a very informal tone.
Tone is a writer's attitude toward his or her subject. Writers convey tone through details such as word choice, imagery, and direct statements about characters or events. Writers must pay close attention to the connotations or emotional impact of their words. Changing the words, phrases, or other details in a piece of writing can change its tone. Tone can usually be described with one or two precise adjectives, such as playful or humorous.
In this lesson, you will be reading selected paragraphs from the excerpt from the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass that you have read in the previous lesson. Think about how Douglass's character is revealed throughout his struggle for freedom. Consider his tone while describing his experiences and how his tone supports his purpose for writing. Use context clues to think aloud about the meaning of difficult words. Let's look at an example. Before we read the passage, I noticed how the writer was thinking aloud about the meaning and clues of difficult words. Now he has a better understanding of the text. He moved on to the question. Let's read the question. What is the author's tone of the first paragraph and how do you know? Use words and phrases to support your response. How does his tone support his purpose? Here's an example from a peer. I think his tone is determined because he said he was compelled to resort to various stratagems. Maybe that means strategies. His purpose is to show that even if she stopped teaching, he would find a way to learn. He also stated he succeeded in learning, which shows he must have been motivated or determined to succeed. Congratulations, you're ready to continue with your lesson. We have made it to the end. So guess what? That's a wrap. Have a great week.
Hi, I'm happy to be back to present a GT8 lesson for the week of May 11th through May 15th. My name's Trista Gordon. I'm a secondary ELA resource teacher, and I hope I can guide you through the process for lesson 1 today called Freedom. Okay, let's get started. As all lessons start with a student outcome, ours for today is to analyze poetry in order to determine its connection to the essential questions and major concepts addressed in Unit 4. As the student outcome stated, you'll be making connections to the overarching or essential questions for the unit. We're well into Unit 4, so we should probably go ahead and review what that really is. The unit of study has been language and community, and it's offered you the opportunity to explore how language can influence a community. You have read and will continue to read various speeches, poems, letters, and articles that identify elements of rhetoric used by the writers and evaluate the effectiveness of the rhetoric. We'll start with our think about it. Take a few moments and think about a time when you did something different or outside the box, even though the majority of people were all doing the same thing. Once you take a few minutes to think about a time you've done that, also think about how that moment, that decision, that action, how taking that step, how that made you feel. How does it feel when you contribute new ideas? I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds to think through your experience. Okay, keep your think about experience in mind, and as we move forward to learn about Langston Hughes, I'm going to ask you to consider why I asked what I did in the think about. Hopefully you can make a connection. Langston Hughes was a poet who helped shape the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s. The critic Donald B. Gibson noted in the introduction to Modern Black Poets, a collection of critical essays, that Hughes differed from the most of his predecessors among Black poets in that he addressed his poetry to the people, specifically to Black people. During the 20s, when most American poets were turning inward, writing obscure, esoteric poetry to an ever-decreasing audience of readers. That word esoteric is underlined there. Esoteric poetry was poetry written for a very specific group, possibly with a certain skill or knowledge base. So someone very specific. While other writers were turning inward, as I mentioned, Langston Hughes was turning outward. In other words, he was using language and themes, attitudes, and ideas familiar to anyone who had the ability simply to read. Until the time of his death, he spread his message humorously, though always seriously, to audiences throughout the country, having read his poetry to more people, possibly than any other American poet. Okay, let's move forward and make a connection, like I talked about earlier, between the time that you thought of in the think about when you had to think differently or step outside the box. You learned a little bit about Langston Hughes. So the question really is, what did you learn about how he did just that? Okay, and if you answered that he did start to think outward instead of inward, okay, outside the box, using themes and language that would appeal to anyone who could read, that is really what took his writing to a different level. I hope you noticed at the beginning of the lesson title is Freedom. And although we are going to pay attention to the poetry itself and analyze Langston Hughes's poem, Freedom's Plow, we are going to start with this question, and it's how do you define the word freedom? I want you to take a couple of seconds, think about how you would define the word freedom and what words, images, and or people come to mind. Freedom is having the ability to act or change without constraint. Someone who is free can change easily and is not constrained in their present state. Today we're going to read the beginning of Langston Hughes's poem called Freedom's Plow. In the digital lesson, hopefully you have seen that some example annotations have been given for you. And of course, I'm going to help you do some thinking aloud through the first few stanzas as you annotate the poem, and then really take a look at the end goal. I do want you to read the poem on your own and really try to continue the annotation process with these things in mind, okay? So we're really looking at the use of words and phrases in the stanza, okay? The author's language, remember, coming back to that concept, how language really does influence a community is important. So you're going to look for words that stand out to you, give you insights about freedom, spark any insights about community, capture the poet's voice